there's enough competition where they're seeing some of their competitors break out, even though they're like, but their tech isn't as good as ours. I'm like, sometimes it doesn't matter. If their marketing is better, they might win.
I would love to dig into your career history because you have been at a16z for quite a while, but you also had a brief stint at, was it Coinbase, I believe. So what has your general learning been through your marketing experience within blockchain?
It's been a really sort of long and very ever-changing curve, I think. So when I started in crypto in 2013, it was Bitcoin, right? And it was super early. And it was this sort of fun greenfield experience of like teaching people what Bitcoin is and kind of like what the mission of this whole movement is. So it was really just like having the first conversations with reporters, conference organizers, generally like people, introducing them to this like concept and what it is. And then we thought the whole thing died, right? For a while, we were like, okay, maybe this crypto thing isn't going to work out. And then with the rise of like Ethereum and some of the other chains and activity, there was this whole new kind of world that was being built. And then it sort of changed into like, what can you build on top of these platforms? Like the composability angle of it, like what's possible. And that's when it started to get really exciting because it felt like it's not necessarily, there's like the financial applications, and within that, there's obviously a huge world. There's also all these non-financial applications. We saw the NFT boom and people understanding the idea of digital collectibles and what they can be. And then the DeFi boom and like a whole new financial system and what's possible. And we've seen so many mini waves do all of those things. And now we're in a world where we have real infrastructure like Aptos, and people can build like a wide range of applications. And now there's a lot of these different projects competing for attention, right? Telling different stories. Whether it's a privacy story, it's like different types of tech and why my tech is better. I think we're still very much in that infrastructure era though, where people are really talking about this deeply technical speeds and feeds, for lack of a better word, like type of message. I don't think we've quite gotten to like the core user benefit side of things yet. I'm really excited for that era to come, and I think it's going to be coming soon. But I think we're still in that era where everybody's trying to attract the best builders. And because of that, it's still a very technical message.
Do you think we're still sort of stuck in a chapter where we're trying to attract builders to consider developing within Web3, or we're kind of going after a more sophisticated or already existing Web3 builder?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think we need to spend a lot more time convincing people to come into Web3. And I think that's particularly difficult right now with the rise of AI, right? It's very sexy, it's very easy. There's a lot of high valuations there. And so if you're a founder, you're like, where do I want to maybe spend my time? And like, I think we probably need to keep working hard to attract people to the world of crypto. But I think it's also a very mission-driven world that we live in, right? So you have to appeal to that mission to pull people in. I think the tools have gotten a lot easier to build, but it's still complicated. And we don't quite have that like slick product design layer yet, right? Like the products are still very difficult to use. So yeah, the world of Web3 developers is very small still and growing, hopefully continuing to grow. But competing for those Web3 builders, it's like, it can be very noisy and very tough. But I think we have to keep thinking outside of that too, to just like be pulling more people in. And I feel like that tends to be, unfortunately, still very much tied to the cycles, right? Like when we see price cycles go up, you tend to be able to get more developers in. We have this whole price innovation cycle that we do as part of our State of Crypto report, where we show that like you get the prices go up, you get more interest and attention, that attracts more builders. There's like a building cycle that lasts, and that compounds over time. But so we just need to keep getting more people in to build that pie. But yeah, it is very competitive right now for these different chains to be competing for this small group of developers.
I think that's always been the challenge within the industry for the last few years, that everyone's competing over an already small batch of people who have the potential to really kind of create that breakout moment for crypto, as it were. How do we build new ways of attracting people that isn't necessarily just the cypherpunk vision that we started with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to come, I think, naturally as we have more applications built on top of this infrastructure that show people what's possible, right? Like maybe, as I mentioned, you move it away from speeds and feeds of chains and more towards like stablecoins are a great example of that, right? Like those are some very easy to understand benefits for people using it every single day, right? There's also some fun consumer applications like Blackbird. There's Helium, which is on the Wi-Fi side. So the more that we have that stuff to talk about, it can also be financial too, like stablecoins. It's just like here at the end of the day is like what we're providing a user that's different and better than what they had before. The more we have that stuff, I think that's where we can get to those greener pastures.
So when it comes to, I guess, some of the marketing that we've seen in recent times, I would say that, stablecoins have had a massive summer. We've coined it stablecoin summer. What are some of the breakout marketing efforts that you've seen that you think have really sort of struck the chord or hit the right note in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's focused on real brands and narratives that tell a story. I mean, I think we were talking a little bit about how you want to be careful not to get caught up too much in the micro cycles that are happening every day. Now, look, some people do have products that are geared towards traders. And with that, you have to be focused on that audience. Totally makes sense. But for the folks that are not, that's not their core audience, like you still have to employ those like marketing principles of like, what is the story you're telling? How is it different than anybody else? Like, how can you create a moat around your narrative? And there's like a lot of fun, sort of stunty things that you can do as long as I think it's in service of that like base narrative, right? But I think we've seen crypto projects have some fun with ad campaigns. I mean, Coinbase has obviously led the way there. They have bigger budgets and they can do some fun things there. Solana's played around with some stuff. Uniswap has played around with stuff, whether that's online, taking over parts of out of home, like in New York. So I think you're seeing more crypto companies do some of that stuff, which is really fun to see. I think World is a good example of a company that has done some things that traditionally large tech, non-crypto tech companies have done, like a big announcement. When they came to the US, for example, they did a huge event in San Francisco. There were hundreds of people there. It was very Apple slick-like in its appeal. You had a really diverse crowd there. They did this amazing, beautiful, slick presentation. They created like a really big moment that took everybody, everybody kind of sat up and paid attention, like this feels real. So I think you're starting to see some of that stuff from crypto that I think is really exciting. At the end of the day, like most of the stuff is going to play out online. But it's also fun to see people kind of creating some of these other moments that are a little bit more traditional brand or ad moments that you haven't seen in crypto as much.
I think it's done a lot in terms of building general awareness around crypto and blockchain. I feel like they are terms that people sort of hear sort of in the background, but they couldn't really give you a narrow definition of what it is. So it's sort of building that public awareness, is expanding mindshare. So it's helping us, I guess, break out of this echo chamber that we consistently find ourselves in. But then I guess it comes down to the question of like, how do we define successful marketing? Because while we'll build awareness, what's the actual needle we're trying to move? And when do we get to say, this has meaningfully changed the game for our industry?
Yeah. I don't know if I can answer that from an industry point of view, but I think it really depends, like company by company, project by project, like what is your most important goal, right? So if your most important goal is to reach traders, then who are the influencers in that space? What are you sending them? And then how are those actions meaningfully moving adoption of your product, right? So I think you have to kind of take it down to that level to see like what makes sense for that individual company. And I think it sounds simple, but I think a lot of these companies do get distracted by what they're seeing. They're like, oh, well, I have to own crypto Twitter. Well, does that make sense for your product? And I don't know, how do you own crypto Twitter anymore? It's really difficult. Like Twitter has changed the algorithm so much too. I think that what the people who thought they had it figured out, it all changed on them. So I think it has to be like very specific to the founders, what the founders believe in and what's right for them, their product, and exactly the audience they're trying to reach, right?
I mean, I think one of the challenges that we've seen, not just within marketing, but in the industry as a practice overall, is that the goalposts move constantly. And when the goalposts move constantly, you kind of find yourself in this, it's a bit of a bear trap situation where you're not quite sure if you should stick to the fundamentals that you began with and like the conviction that you began with, or you should pivot for the sake of following the market's interest.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about the hype cycles that continue. And, do you want to ride that wave? And are you too late if you try and chase it? So the way I've kind of approached it also as a marketer is to say that if you don't have your brand fundamentals or your product fundamentals sort of squared away, it's nearly impossible to chase the perfect wave. You kind of have to time yourself and position yourself for it. But I think as an industry, how do you, I guess, build the confidence and conviction either as a marketer or as a founder to stick to what you began with and then believe that the market will pay off, that the market will eventually serve what you've built?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of questions in there. I think there's like, how do you ride the waves as a marketer? And I think you can ride certain waves as a marketer without necessarily changing the product or the product focus or the company focus. So for example, like if you're a stablecoin focused company and everybody's talking about these, asset treasury companies, these DATs, and everybody's talking about like the movement of Ethereum, for example, like you can figure out how to weigh in on that conversation to build your profile and to ride that wave a little bit and give yourself more opportunities to talk about your company and what you're doing, right? So there's like, how do you ride that wave as a marketer? And that I think you should always try to be kind of clever and opportunistic about. And then there's, I guess, the other part of it, which is like, do we pivot as a company in our product to ride these waves? And I think that's a much tougher question because as their founders are kind of going through this, what we call the idea maze, they're trying to find their product market fit. Maybe they're trying one avenue and then like, maybe we need to pivot to this. That's like a harder question. I think I probably can't weigh in on. And I still think in that case, sometimes it does make some sense to pivot and follow that wave, or sometimes it doesn't, you know what I mean? But as a marketer, I think it can be helpful to be opportunistic and ride some of these waves because like, let's say that's what the media are writing about. That's what people are talking about online. Can you insert yourself into that conversation in an interesting, meaningful way that just gives you a bigger platform? I say go for it, right?
So there's an element of being able to retrofit your messaging into something that's already happened, or to capture the zeitgeist.
Like trend jack. Yeah.
But not in a way that comes at the expense of the fundamental brand.
Yeah. You're basically trying to shoehorn in, create yourself an opening by riding that wave a little bit, having something relevant and interesting to say about what's happening right now. But then at that, like, hopefully they're like, oh, that person was always smart on all these different topics. I want to hear about what they're doing with their company. Or you have now gained more followers. You now have more press calling you to weigh in on things, so that when you have your own announcement or your own launch, you are primed and you have an audience who are hopefully going to listen when you're ready to talk about your own company, your own product, right?
So when it comes to, let's say, a smaller ecosystem project, they've built fundamentally very good tech. They've got an interesting and compelling product, but they don't really have, I guess, the marketing bandwidth or resource to really create a splash. How would you recommend that they build up some kind of market attention for themselves?
Yeah, that's the question they all ask. It's a good question. I think building the founder profile is really crucial. They have to have something interesting to say. And it doesn't have to be, let's say if it's a group of 5 founders, it doesn't have to be all 5. It can be one of them. But one of them has to step up and say, okay, I'm going to be the kind of voice of this project. And, you have to be really systematic about it, right? It can't just be, you have to think about it in a very serious way. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to just tweet occasionally. It's like, no, sit down, like, what do I have to offer? what are the topic areas that I'm going to be commenting on, talking about? What insight can I offer that nobody else can? And then how does that intersect with like our product and our company and help us kind of get to meet our goals, right? Try to look at like the Venn diagram of those things and then write, like our social media person, Ish, for example, always says like, he sits down on the Sunday before the week and he writes out like, what are my 3-4 tweets going to be for the week, right? They don't have to necessarily be just reacting to what's going on in the news. They can be like, I always like to say, like, what is the advice or the conversations that you're having every day? How do you open source them and bring them to everybody? So like Tolly, I think of Solana does this really well. He sort of builds in public. So he's constantly talking about some of the things that they're working on, some of the challenges that they have. Like people love that type of content. You don't necessarily have to come up with some crazy new insight that nobody's ever thought about. You can talk about some of the things that you're dealing with going through as a founder and, sort of sharing that founder journey and product journey is really helpful. It might start with a small founder audience and it might grow from there, but it shows people that you're being really thoughtful. And I think it's a great recruiting tool, right? It can help you punch above your weight. Like Claire Cart, who's the head of marketing at Aztec, I think has done this really well. Like Aztec is a, fairly smallish project. They are heading towards mainnet, but up until this point, she has gone out there, built a big profile for herself to allow Aztec to have a bigger platform, right? People are kind of sitting up, paying attention to this project in a bigger way because of what she's done online. And I think founders can take a cue from that and say, okay, this is how I can leverage these platforms to give me a bigger audience so that as we're ready to launch products, launch company, et cetera, we will be, we'll have a built-in audience already, right? So I think founder profile is huge. Creating moments. So I think too often founders will say like, oh, we're just going to roll out this product, but they don't really think intentionally, like have an announcement, like be really strategic about how you put that out. What story are you telling there? Are you pitching it to media? Are you getting other influencers or supporters in your network to amplify it? Think about the people around you, the investors, the supporters that you have who have big followings, bigger than yours. How can you get them to amplify and help tell your story? And instead of just sort of like, I'm just going to put a tweet out and say like, oh, we're doing this thing. It's like, well, who's going to see that, right? How are people going to like really feel like this is a major milestone? Startups don't have a lot of milestones, right? Like they have funding, they have a product announcement, which are not going to happen very often. So I always really encourage companies to milk and cherish each of those moments and make the most of them, right? And then in between those big moments where you don't have your own news, again, how do you trend jack? How do you say something interesting about what's going on in the world right now? How do you insert yourself into the conversation that's happening at that moment? And a lot of founders who are very data oriented will say like, but what do I get out of that? This isn't going to translate into users tomorrow. It's a long sales cycle. It's something that builds up over time. It's sort of like relationship building. It's not as easy as like inputs out, like, you put something in, you get something out like immediately. I think that's why it's a little bit of a tougher sell for these more technical founders. But the people that have done it well, and there's so many examples of it, like you can see that, like how much they've gotten out of that, right?
I feel like one of the challenges that we've seen within crypto is that there's either an underestimation or a misunderstanding of how critical marketing is to the entire equation in terms of building awareness, building marketing traction, narrative building, brand building, all of these things that tend to sort of happen in the background, but you don't really have a measurable impact, as you just said. So how do we not educate, but like continue to demonstrate how fundamental marketing is to the entire equation?
Yeah, I know. It's it can be frustrating. I mean, it's a conversations I'm having with founders every single day. A lot of them are very technical founders. They're engineers. Marketing is, doesn't come first nature to them. So they they need to rely on experts around them, but they don't generally have a marketing expert on that core founding team. Some of them are just naturally good at it. I think that they just, it comes naturally. They see the benefit of it. And I think that those folks have such a head start, right? But I don't know if how we tackle it as an industry. I think it's probably just part of the natural maturation of this space, right? Like, again, we're still in this like very technical phase. It's very engineer driven, very kind of speeds and feeds. And so they're trying to reach developers, right? It does feel like a little bit more narrow, but I think then you're going to start to have more breakouts, like the Worlds and others who are taking some big swings when it comes to marketing. And that will then, I hopefully like influence and inspire some of these other folks. And you cannot deny that there are a lot of founders and individuals on Twitter, for example, that have very big audiences that maybe don't even have huge successful projects yet. But they do have outsized influence and everybody can see that. So it's also like, look, like if you can build something even fraction as big as that, it will give you an advantage, right? So there are, for those folks who are, they want the measurable stuff, you can look at some of that stuff and be like, look how big that audience is and what that audience will give you, right? You can point to those. I think that often what I hear is like, I don't have time, right? I don't have time. There are a lot of amazing consultants and experts that you can hire to help you with all of these things, right? There really are. You don't have to hire some big agency. And I don't think the budget numbers are going to break the bank. I don't also find that funding is necessarily such a hard thing in crypto. There's a lot of money going around. Spending a little bit of money to hire somebody with, helping you figure out your social profile, help you with an announcement when you're doing an announcement, hiring somebody for 6 weeks or 3 months to take you through a big moment in time, like it's worth it, right? And then the other thing is these people can teach you, right? They can teach you, handhold you through what does a really great blog post look like, right? What is a great interview, media interview? How do you accomplish that? They can teach all these things to you. So it's not just like, what is the result? Like, how many stories am I going to get? Or how big of a hit is my blog post going to get on Twitter? But like, what am I actually learning through this process? So I think founders, it's helpful for them to consider both sides of that.
And I think one of the key words there is to invest in it. If it's lacking within the team, go find it.
Yeah. I think projects are also starting to see now that there's enough competition where they're seeing some of their competitors break out, even though they're like, but their tech isn't as good as ours. I'm like, sometimes it doesn't matter. If their marketing is better, they might win, even if the tech isn't as great. I feel like I'm starting to see that a little bit more now, where they're like, oh shoot, this actually really matters, and I have to invest in it. It's never too late.
Because I think the adage always sort of ran within the blockchain space, which is like, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
And that's been continually disproven time and time again because of marketing. And so I think, there are countless projects who never really made it to mainnet, but had such incredible community marketing efforts, so much momentum, so much mind share, that it didn't really matter that they never really launched because people loved it. It was something they wanted to pay attention to. It was something they wanted to be a part of. There was almost like an aspirational element to it. So those that have really kind of doubled down into building robust, waterproof, bulletproof technology were sort of sitting in the quiet wondering why nobody had really come to the fair. So it's how do those people still find the thing that makes their product exciting rather than relying on the thing that they believe makes it cool, which is the thing that the vast majority of audiences don't resonate with and don't click with.
Yeah, that's where it's okay to get help. You know what I mean? It's okay if you're not great at everything. Like if that's marketing is not a muscle you have, like you can hire people and build that muscle, right? I think it's okay to admit that you are not going to be great at everything. And look, like you do want some organic growth, right? Like you don't want to just be, falsely pumping something, right? Because I've seen some projects do that where they put in tons of incentives into something. And then once those incentives pull back, they see the, usage or adoption drop. And that's where you're like, okay, well, there are probably some inherent product things that you need to fix to like really juice the organic growth. But yeah, I usually feel like you can't just build something and wait for them to come either. So,
but then I think what we also see is there tends to be a conflation between token price and product market fit.
yeah.
And so when you see these token generation events and you see a price pump,
Yeah.
people don't really demarcate between the initial enthusiasm of a product versus the actual utility of the project past that token generation event.
Yeah.
So it's how do we actually build longevity into the way that people interact in the market? Because if it's just a pump and dump scheme, we're not really getting anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I often have conversations with founders where they're like, we need help with token marketing. And I'm like, I'm not sure it's marketing. I think you need some really good people on the ground in Korea, perhaps, to help with your token. But the marketing should be a very long-term, thoughtful, brand narrative-based exercise, right? No matter what happens with the token. I mean, you want people to feel like there's a compelling story and need there, regardless of what's happening with the token. You have to sort of separate it. Like, I hate to make the analogy because, the security commodity policy debate, but like, if you working at a public company, like when I was at Coinbase, you can't get distracted by the stock movements, right? You have to stay super focused on what you're building, what you're putting out there, what the message is. And if you're doing the right stuff, it will impact the stock price in the right way. And sometimes it won't, and it's incredibly frustrating, and there's nothing you can do about it. But you've got to stay focused. I think it's something Brian Armstrong has always done really well. Like, he had great focus and also really coached folks internally on that well. Like, you've got to, block out that noise from out there. We've got to stay focused, and like, it's going to keep going like this. And the same with tokens. And sometimes it won't make sense, and it's infuriating. And it can be demoralizing internally, right? But if you keep people focused on the right long-term, goals.
I mean, I think it's kind of understanding it. It's like correlational rather than a causational relationship. But I think it not only affects morale within the team, but it also affects morale outside, because you could almost use a token price as like a sentiment score of how your brand is perceived in the market.
Yeah.
And so it's, when the price is down, the ecosystem's down, like the sentiment is down, morale is low. And those are the very people you're sort of trying to soothe. And so there becomes this almost tricky relationship between like the marketing team and the community members, because while you're focused on this longer term goal, you have a community of loyalists who you still have to take care of.
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, it's really dangerous to be judging marketing based on the token price. I think you're never going to win.
Yeah.
And I've heard, surprisingly, a number of people who've told me that. They're like, as a marketer in this organization, it's like, I could have done all the right things, all the best in class things. But then that token price goes down and they're like, we failed. And it's like, that's a really tough and impossible place to be. So absolutely cannot be judging marketing on, immediate token price changes. Like, that's a losing proposition.
I think it's also that as an industry, we're sort of used to watching these pump and dump cycles.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that dynamic has almost socially been baked into how we interact within Web3 overall. So it's almost like we're used to or accustomed to or expecting that to happen, so that when people buy into a token, I think before because we were very ethos driven, we had a hodl attitude. And then now I feel like that sort of shifted a little bit, where everyone's saying, well, I'm here to play the game. So it's kind of a max extract dynamic, which is, again, clipping us at the heels when it comes to marketing, brand building, and ultimately product building, because this liquidity is important to the sustainability of projects. But if that is so at the mercy of token holders, we're never going to really give these credible projects enough support to get off the ground.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's a really dangerous thing. I think there is definitely there is some of that going on for sure. There's also a lot of sane people who are in it for the long term. And I see when they see somebody maybe who is not, who is like dropping out or maybe not taking as ethical of an approach to these things, I think they also kind of get called out very quickly. It can be kind of brutal. So I think there are a lot of sort of cops, if you will, within our world who also try to keep it in check. But yeah, no, there are some short-term incentives, obviously, and it can be dangerous to go down that path with marketing too. But I don't know, you have to stay optimistic, right?
We're all still here.
Yeah.
So if you had to give, like, I guess one piece of critical advice to an early stage founder who's building, let's say, a non-DeFi project on a relatively well-known chain, but is kind of looking to have their breakout moment, like, what's the advice that you would give them as a marketer?
I'd say, like, how much can you leverage that chain to help you with your marketing, right? Like Aptos, so there's like, you have a whole team that is here to help amplify these builders and these applications and stuff, and they should take full advantage of that, right? Like they're not alone, right? That's the benefit of building on these different chains, whichever one you choose.
Yeah.
And then I would say, like, invest in marketing. It doesn't, again, have to be huge budgets. It could be just on your own, taking it seriously, building your own profile. It could be maybe hiring a couple people on a project basis for small fees to kind of get you going, and again, to learn from them. It doesn't necessarily mean hiring a full-time person. This is another thing I often hear is like, I need to hire a CMO. I'm like, you're a 5-person team that is pre-product. Like, you don't need a CMO yet. Do you need kind of like somebody who can jump in there, Jack or Jill of all trades, who can be a little bit of marketing and some other things? Maybe. But before you bring in this super high level person, there are, again, a lot of like experts and consultants that you can bring in to kind of complement your team. And then you can grow from there. Maybe then you eventually hire maybe a director of marketing, right? Somebody who can grow a little bit more into the role, but again, can be very much a doer and do a lot of different things. I think you only need to be thinking like of a VP level when you're ready to kind of build a team, right? And you're thinking
Build the brand on a more macro level.
Yeah, like and leading up to a mainnet type of event, or when you feel like you're reaching a much broader audience and you have a more robust product and company story to tell. That is actually, so it's funny. It's either they're like, don't invest anything in marketing, or they're hiring a CMO. And I'm like, there's a whole world in between that.
So what we need is nuance.
Yeah.
So basically you need someone who's willing to get their hands dirty, but also leverage the resources that you have at your disposal. So whether it's, the chain that you're building on, marketing team, the amplification support that you can get from there, also the community momentum that exists within that realm as well. And I guess don't jump the gun. Start with the early, smaller steps first before you think big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Like kind of get some early wins. And also, you're early, you can try stuff, right? And like keep trying stuff. Like, and if something, look, I know even some people have taken some big swings with like ad campaigns and they haven't worked out. But I still love to see people trying stuff. Like, as long as you handle it well, and if it's not working out, call it and like say, okay, it didn't work out, we tried it, let's move on. But like, try some stuff, right? I think that sometimes these technical founders, like we were talking about, kind of sit in this like bunker for years building and then think, ta-da, I've got something. And it's like, you missed this opportunity of all these years to be building a community and audience, telling people who you are. And now you're ready to scale, you're ready to announce, and nobody knows who you are, right?
So it's basically like, despite how perfect or how groundbreaking your product is, you don't have the privilege of staying quiet at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to, as you said earlier, kind of build out in the open or represent yourself in another domain so that these two things can come together.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of insights shared there. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope that, some of the projects that are building within our space take heed to a lot of your advice.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.